Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, I think because we're in our 24th year, I interview poets and other writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've done in the past, what they're planning for the future. We have on poets, novelists, journalists, all sorts of writers, and we also have on occasion other brands of artists. We've had on musicians and sculptors, actors, many sorts of talented people. If you have an idea for someone who might be right for the writer's block, either penman or other kind of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd love to get your suggestions and consider your ideas for the program. I also want to remind you that Cape Ann TV, which produces the Writer's Block and many other original programs, is very proud of our record and the records of those other shows. This is a product of community cable access television, and you don't get it with Dish. So remember that the next time you see a commercial for Dish on your cable TV set. Tonight, I'm happy to say we do have a writer. Her name is Sharon Chase, a lady who was on the show several years ago and for an earlier book. She is a native Cape Anner. She was born in Gloucester, grew up in Rockport, went to Rockport High School, and then later to Albion College, way out in the Midwest, and took a triple major of art, English, and religion at that time, and then later, at the close of the last century, took a master's degree in theological studies with a biblical concentration. She is a theologian and writes about theology, and when she was on the show last time, she reminded me, I interviewed her about Protestant Pulse, Heart Hopes for God, and asked her if she believed in God. She said yes, but adds in this letter, today I still believe in God, but consider myself to be a provisional theist, meaning that I admit that I could be wrong. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. I love that the wit and the surprise of that line, so I wanted to read it as part of your introduction. I hope you didn't mind.
I think it's a wonderful way to start. Little theological mischief just enlivens me.
Theological mischief.
Yes.
Well, we're getting close to Halloween here, so I guess it's appropriate. I want to hold up your new book, Images of Light, Ascent to Trust in Triumph, a book about meditative tools applied to the New Testament. And I want to ask you first, even though I know the answer because it has to do with an Advent project, how did this book come about?
Well, Reverend James Fletcher, who was our interim minister at First Congregational in Rockport, wanted to do an Advent course. And he wanted to do it around the theme of light. And he was talking with me about it, and it was a little bit vague, and I said, well, I don't want to, butt in and just offer to do it. He said, oh, yes, please butt in. You can just write it. So I did. But then the Advent course had to be canceled. So I decided to rewrite it for Lent, which proved to be a very, very good thing. So that's what I did. And I will read you just a little bit about that, if that's okay with you.
What page are you going to read?
I am on page Roman numeral 13.
Please.
Well, the Advent program had to be canceled, and that was a blessing because then I could expand it to a book for any season, but still most appropriate for Advent or Lent. And I wrote, nature underscores human yearnings for light. In the dark days of Advent, we cherish light. In the lengthening days of Lent, we wait for the days of longest light. Advent waiting can also be Easter waiting. The Christmas tree can be understood as a tree of life. Well, I summarize the main themes of this book in a poem. You know, sometimes writers take long pieces of prose and condense it. And so my poem called Advent Waiting summarizes the main thrust of the book. Advent Waiting. Sunlight shining through scallop shells, glowing on the Christmas tree, create symbols of sacred journeys to wisdom's winning light. Glowing on the Christmas tree, each ornament hung with hope to turn to wisdom's winning light, when darkness will be overcome by goodness. Each ornament hung with hope to turn, create symbols of sacred journeys, when darkness will be overcome by goodness, sunlight shining through scallop shells. The main idea of this book is contemplating artistic and biblical images of light can help people navigate life as they ascend to trust and triumph.
And Trust and Triumph is the subtitle. This
right.
is Images of Light, Ascent to Trust in Triumph.
Right. Okay, and the victory is human goodness that is informed by Jesus and other wise people.
So I want to make sure our viewers get this clear. This started out as a meditation tool to introduce people to Advent. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out, but you had all that work done already. So you expanded it, and it is now, I would say, a guide in 14. I forget. 14. I forget the chapter number of the last chapter. A guide to thinking about parts of Scripture and reflecting at the same time with contemporary, not contemporary, but classic and contemporary art, and sometimes poetry, yes, that is an aid to sort of elucidating those passages.
Right. Light, unless you're talking about a light bulb, you know, light's pretty abstract. And so I talk about the light of inclusion, the light of birth, the light of forgiveness, the light of caring, the light of speaking truth to power, those kinds of lights. I weave together art masterpieces with biblical passages and reflections on those kinds of lights that as we participate in the lights of inclusion, forgiveness, caring, we make it more possible for goodness to triumph, for human goodness to triumph.
So someone who's not a Christian can take this and meditate and learn about kindness,
absolutely,
or consideration for other persons.
Absolutely.
Or in a more general way without accepting all the tenets behind it.
That's true. I am bridge building to atheists. As you notice, there are prayers in the back of the book that go with each chapter, and I did the prayers in two different versions, a theistic prayer and a non-theistic prayer, or a humanistic prayer. You might like to know that when I took the course, Contemplative Prayer, the Theology of Contemplative Prayer, Western Jesuit School of Theology, I said in class one day, sometimes it makes things clearer if you leave God out. And some of my classmates were horrified, and one said to me, "Oh, wait till you get your grade." Well, I did, and I'm not bragging but I am saying I had a straight A, so I couldn't have turned the professor off too much. And he was such a conservative professor that he went off and taught at the Gregorian Institute in Rome.
A Jesuit.
A Jesuit. So, you know, so sometimes some of the prayers in the back I like best in the theistic version and some in the non-theistic version.
And you said, as before, in the letter I read, that you are partly theist now?
I consider myself to be a provisional theist. That means I admit I could be wrong. And I see most God talk, perhaps all God talk, as metaphorical. Actually, on Religion and Ethics Newsweekly last Sunday, Christian Wyman, who until recently was the editor of Poetry magazine, said all God talk is metaphoric. or metaphorical.
Spoken like a poet.
Yes, which he is.
Yes, yes, which he is, yes. Can you share with us something else, another passage from Images of Light that reflects its function as a tool for meditation, whether you're atheist or theist?
Okay, I don't. Let me put it how Harry Cook put it.
What page
On page 5. Margaret Miles, who is a theologian, has asked how we can be passionately committed to our own beliefs and open to others. And Harry Cook, who before retirement was an Episcopal priest and an atheist in that he is not a theist. I think he might be more of an agnostic, but that's not for me to say, said, he also was an Albion graduate, imagine the relaxation of tensions and conflict in the world if only religious leaders of the various communities of faith were to refrain from claiming absolute and exclusive truth for their sacred texts. And then he further, I think, answers Miles' questions by saying, a breakthrough could come where respective scholars of Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to acknowledge that their individual belief systems are at best metaphoric approximations of what may be true. So that is what I will claim from my deepest held beliefs, that they are metaphorical approximations of what might be true. That way I can sing gospel hymns with abandon, and I love some of those old songs.
Yes, indeed. Although that attitude within some of these religions can get you killed in many centuries and many locales, including this century.
That is true.
Would you read, because this is a writer's show and with an emphasis on poetry, could you take one of the poems in here that is used to illustrate a biblical text and point out why you chose it or wrote it?
Okay, these are mostly prose.
They are.
Right.
I'm thinking of Indigo Buntings, for instance.
Oh, yes, yes. That is in here, and it's in the story, in the chapter called Resurrection. And I'll tell the story about that. Eleanor Parsons of Rockport was my second mother, who brought me up along with our harbor master, Rosemary Lesh, after my first mother died when I was 3.5. And her sister and her sister's fundamentalist friends were really worried that Ellie was going to die and not get to heaven because she wasn't a member of the church. So she tried to get me to get a chaplain to get Ellie to join the church on her deathbed. Well, I was going to have no part of that. I did ask Aunt Hopi what was at stake, and she said, well, her parents would be pleased. And I said, but you know, they're dead. And so, no, Hopi, I'm not going to do that. But I said, Hopi. So I didn't tell Ellie that much of what was going on because I didn't want to get her upset. But she did know that Aunt Hopi, her sister, was worried she wasn't going to heaven. So I said, well, you know, tell you what, Ellie, when you get up there, you send me 2 indigo buntings. And then I will write a letter I will send the poem to Aunt Hopi and her friend. Now that was a very tall order because I'd only seen 2 indigo buntings in my whole life. One was in the backyard in Pigeon Cove, and the other was in the parking lot of the registry in Charlestown or Claremont, New Hampshire, I forget which is which, when Ernie and I went to renew our driver's licenses. But of course, I got 2 indigo buntings, not real ones. They were on a card from Betty Erkler, who's been on your show, Betty and John Erkler of Pigeon Cove. So I will read you the Indigo Bunting sonnet. 2 weeks before Eleanor Parsons died, I asked her for a sign from the beyond, specifying 2 indigo buntings, loveliest birds, pure notes of heaven's song. 2 birds don't have to be in the same place. Just one would seem like a coincidence. Double sightings would make a stronger case. Confirm God's wide welcome, love's deepest sense. Before the memorial service day, a blessed sympathy note came in the mail. An indigo bunting. Thank you, I prayed. Bunting also on the back, my spirit sailed. Proof or temporal ambiguity, creating room for beauty's mystery.
So, quite a coincidence. Or, yes, the big or. I wanted to emphasize in the book there are a number of poems.
Yes, there are.
Which are used as tools, as are the paintings that you, as you say, it's too expensive to put the paintings in the book.
Right.
But they can be easily found. For instance, Resurrection by Matthias Grunwald. You can find that stuff online in a second. I want to ask a couple of technical questions,
Sure.
if I may. From the time you conceived this book, which I imagine was probably when you found out the Advent work wasn't going to come to fruition, to when you actually finished the book, how long did that process take, and was it a daily workplace kind of thing?
I think approximately 2 years. I thought I was going to go nuts with this book. This is the book I didn't think I could do, and there were so many pieces to put together. But basically, unless I'm teaching a New Testament Greek or something at the church like that, I am at least probably 4 days a week. I am at the computer as soon as the coffee kicks in, and probably work for 2 hours. Because I'm at a certain stage with my next book, the time of writing has shifted a little bit, so that I do some of that time is for art and some of it is for marketing of this book. But I'm probably working at least 2 hours a day and then some more time on marketing, at least 4 days a week, and sometimes on Saturday and Sundays too.
For 2 years?
Yes.
Now that might be, I know our viewers would like to learn more about this, but that might be a good segue to the new book, because you just mentioned the new book that you're working on now.
Yes, I have. I am working on.
Let me leave for a minute. I'll remind our audiences of Images of Light, but I want to make sure we give at least a few minutes to your new work that you just referred to, that has to do with a famous 19th century North Shore lady by the name of Lucy Larcom. Can you tell us about that new book that you're working on, Sharon?
The new book will be called Cape Ann and Beyond the Cut Bridge. The subtitle is Culling and Cartwheeling. It's mostly poetry with a few essays to give it context, the context of my spiritual ancestor, Lucy Larcom, and the context of theological aesthetics.
So is this sort of like the reverse of Images of Light? Images of Light, you look at the text first and then support it meditatively with other art forms. Now you're looking at Cape Ann for the inspiration first and sort of going backwards. Do I have that right? Not backwards, but the other.
I think that's a fair statement, because I wrote the poetry and then I wrote my author's note to give it context. An essay in there called Beauty as Revelation was based on a sermon I did when Reverend Jim was interim minister about beauty as revelation. So.
And give us the title of that again, please.
Cape Ann and Beyond the Cut Bridge, Culling and Cartwheeling. It will come out by Whip and Stock probably early 2015.
2015, so it's still a ways off.
Right.
And give us a little bit more background on your spiritual ancestor. You said Lucy Larcom.
Well, Lucy Larcom wrote a book of poetry called Wild Roses of Cape Ann, and although she's most famous for New England Girlhood, which was about her experience in the Lowell Mills. But we share some theological concerns across the centuries, really. She had themes of ascent in her poetry. She wrote about climb climb the mountains climb, I can't remember the exact line, I could find it, but she had ascent themes, and she wrote a poem called Horizons, and I had written the same title. And she had an intellectual bent towards religion. She was looking for something that was beyond the Puritanism of her day. Like me, I think she had an Emersonian thought process, but not always Emersonian conclusions.
What were her dates?
After the Civil War, late 1890s, 1860s, I believe.
So did she live into the 20th century?
I don't believe so.
Oh. You brought also some pictures.
Yes, I did.
Because I think the book that you're projecting, the new one, the Cape Ann book, is going to rely on art as well as images of light. Although do I have this understood? You're going to actually have these in the text?
Yes, only in black and white. Lucy had a sense of the sacramental in nature. She could find a sacrament in a flower. And two of my poems in this forthcoming book are show the sacramental qualities in nature. And I think the ones that are the strongest in that respect are, one's called Summer and the other one is called Petite Ode to Pigeon Cove.
And what is the title of this?
That's Summer, and it doesn't really matter, but it's upside down.
And who's painted this?
Yes, I painted that.
This is yours?
Yes, my college art professor said a good painting can be seen either way if it's an abstract. So don't worry about holding it upside down.
Okay.
That's called Summer.
And you have a...
and I have it with me so that I wouldn't mess up. And it's called Summer. Canopy of rose of Sharon, with music, gift of bees, mountains of hydrangea blues, blessings for the pleased, sunset glow on earth below, holes and moles receiving souls, on the going, on the way, of unfolding, day each day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, I just got the 5-minute signal from Casey, our camerawoman. So I want to make sure I show these. I want to make sure I get this right. What is the title of this, please?
That doesn't have a title yet, but I could call it Wild Roses. It's going to, hopefully, I think it will be after my author's note, in which I talk about Lucy Larcom's poetry book, Wild Roses of Cape Ann.
And you're going to mention many, many locations around Cape Ann that are inspirational to you.
Yes.
And whose beauty is revelatory, as you say.
Yes.
And let me hold up the last.
Okay. This has the poem, Petite Ode to Pigeon Cove.
Okay.
Should I read that one?
Yes, please. No, I want to make sure I've got the sky on the top. Okay.
Actually, that's water.
Water.
Coming into the tide pool on in Pigeon Cove. It's called Petite Ode to Pigeon Cove. Sunken magical tide pool in the rocks of Pigeon Cove, starfish, seaweed, shadows cool, cast in beauty's mold. Lady slippers, pussy willows, rich dark loam, in the woods of childhood memory, mystery as deep as a Buddhist cone, cast in beauty's chemistry. Indigo buntings perch on telephone wires, tool company turn to rust. Joy flows, listening to all birds' choirs, cast in beauty's muster.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And that's a peek preview at the new book.
That's a preview
which will come
of the
out
new
in
book.
2 years, approximately 2 years. I just got the 3-minute signal already from Kelsey, so I want to make sure that I remind our guests about Images of Light, new book by Sharon Chase. Where is this available, Sharon?
The best prices are directly from the publisher, Whip and Stock.
Okay. And
it's on Amazon.
We've supered that on the screen.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
And they like phone calls, and you know, sometimes you can go on Amazon and get one for 1 cent. You know.
Yeah, just pay $2 to have them.
And that's always a good deal.
Sharon, thank you for coming down.
You're welcome.
Again, and talking about your very open attitude towards theology, the biblical texts you deal with, and images of light. And we're looking forward also to the inspiration you've drawn from Cape Ann, as many of us do. Thanks for coming down.
You're welcome.
I want to thank our viewers out in television land for being with us as well. If you've learned something about meditation and beauty and drawing revelation from beauty from Sharon Chase, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.